Hello, this is Silas, and this is the last part of me and my friend Stephen reading and discussing the Time magazine article, The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election. So, Stephen and I have been reading this brazen article, as Stephen probably puts it. It makes me laugh every time because we were wondering, what is this? Stephen thought it was a joke when he first heard it. I thought it was like, wait, what's going on here? But I'm not really going to actually read it because it seems like it's kind of inane that it's actually there because it's content and things that Stephen and I and other people had been pointing out. But why did they decide to write this article? It was part of the thing that I was wondering, why is this a victory lap? Is this an admission? Are they getting ahead of certain information that they think is going to be there? And I thought there's actually things that happened that were discussed, and they wanted to come out and say, okay, this is what X is. X in this case being the very credible questions that people have had over what happened in the 2020 election. Because there's been a lot of questions around that. It didn't take those multiple weeks, almost months, to settle this thing down out of nothing. There might have been some caricatures of who was saying what and what was actually being said, but there's actual things out there. And now people like Trump have been saying it's Y, people have been saying it's A, someone else might come out and say no, it's T, and some people might have been like, hey, it's Q, and it doesn't agree with most of the Q people on this. But I think this was the people who are actually involved in it coming out and saying, no, it's not Y that Trump was saying. It's actually Z. This is what we did. And for various reasons, and I think it's an important thing to actually read. And I thought instead of just having those kind of places and people with like, oh, you never actually read the article, you never actually analyzed it, I called Stephen up and they said, hey, let's actually read this together, part of our conversation series, and see how this goes. And I think it went pretty well for a rather short time of starting this about a week and a half ago when the article came out, and then finally getting the last part out now. And thank you for listening. If you've been listening, thank you if this is your first one. There's seven more out there. So if you enjoy this, there's going to be more content for you and other content on the channel. But let's just get into that now. If you want to hear more about the little intros that we normally have before them, you can check out the other videos, and those will have a little longer intros than this one. But just getting into it now. Thanks.
Sure. All right. So I'll start off.
Yeah, how close we came.
Okay. I'll just do the first two because, yeah. There was one last milestone on Podhorser's mind, January 6th. On the day Congress would meet to tally the electoral count, Trump summoned his supporters to D.C. for a rally. Much to their surprise, the thousands who answered his call were met by virtually no counter-demonstrators. To preserve safety and ensure they couldn't be blamed for any mayhem, the activist left was, quote, strenuously discouraging counter-activity, end quote. Podhorser texted me the morning of January 6th with a crossed fingers emoji. So, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So basically it comes across like, all right, they're trying to insinuate that he started violence at the Capitol, and he knows that if Antifa actually did show up and clash, there would be violence that would make them look bad. So he knew what the outcome would be, but he was just hoping they would stay back, which they did. There's been some stuff they've debated about Antifa infiltrating these groups. I don't know enough about that to really say, but it's like they were hoping this wouldn't be spun in a way that would make the left look bad. It was all Trump and his supporters' fault. Go ahead.
It was clearly mostly Trump supporters. There's some people there with some mixed allegiances and things like that. Some people have come out, and this one individual was actually on CNN. His supposed female friend, girlfriend, I don't know what kind of relation they had actually done reporting work for, I think, CNN and some other places. Paraphrasing, don't quote me on that. But they were clearly not pro-Trump people. There's videos of them talking about, oh, I'm not pro-Trump, I'm going to get in, I'm going to act like I'm a Trump person. There's websites of him having Black Lives Matter and Antifa-related groups back in Utah and things like that. He's actually gotten in some issues because part of his terms of being released after he was arrested, he was like the second person arrested in this whole situation, as he was right by the location where Ashley Babbitt was shot dead. He was released and he was told you shouldn't talk about this until it's actually settled because there's still some pending issues with it, and he's kept talking about it, so that thinks he's actually violated that. So that was a mixed bag. But when they say here and they say, okay, much to the thousands who answered the call, the surprise, first of all, it was like 150,000. You see, in this situation, it was at least probably about 200,000 people had been in the DC area in that place. So It seemed to be. I don't know. It wasn't thousands. It was at least 100,000. So you tens of thousands, maybe you'd say that. So when they talk about the danger of it, it's tens of thousands. These people were, it was this coup, this whole horrific insurrection type of thing. We were in such danger. But when they're talking about this, saying, hey, Trump could only get thousands of people out there who answered
Yeah.
the call. It's a few thousands of people answered the call. And much to their surprise, they were received no counter demonstrators. To whose surprise? Who did they interview to this to find out that they were surprised there were going to be no counter demonstrators? Who was expecting counter demonstrations? Or is again another projection where are they tying it in with that whole storytelling technique that they're saying that this storytelling goes around and people don't really notice that it's happening. Now this is the conclusion. They're tying it into the start. In the start, they said liberal people had thousands of people. They were planning things around, and then Proud Boys were ready to actually combat them, or the right-wing militia were ready to combat them. So maybe they're saying, oh, because that's what happens when they go out, then this is what happens when this happens. And how many of these kind of organizations, these kind of actual events were held by mostly Trump supporters? Most of them were people on the roads and things like that, and there was actual rallies, and there was hardly any actual backlash to it. But when you had the more activist black bloc type of things and the leftists, sometimes there'd be places where people would come in and counter those kind of events. I don't know.
Yeah, again, it's that whole thing of like, if Trump had won a second time, they would have gone to DC immediately, and then this would be framed as these are social justice protests to prevent a coup and to achieve racial justice, blah, blah, blah. But because he's approaching it from the angle of this is what would have happened if the outcome had gone the other way, oh, I'm assuming it's going to happen this way here too.
Yeah. Okay, next paragraph.
Yep.
Trump addressed the crowd that afternoon, peddling the lie that lawmakers or Vice President Pence could reject states' electoral votes. He told them to go to the Capitol and fight like hell. Then he returned to the White House as they sacked the building. As lawmakers fled for their lives and his own supporters were shot and trampled, Trump praised the rioters as very special.
Ugh. Again, more dishonest framing. He didn't praise the rioters. Didn't he even explicitly say about being peaceful? Whereas, again, of course, Democrats praised rioters. Vice President Harris even raised funding to bail rioters out of jail. So don't give me this whole thing.
Yeah, that's the thing. I would be interested to know what Molly Ball thinks, if this is what she actually believes and she wasn't just cashing a paycheck, writing what she needed to write, like somebody who's writing the script for like Star Trek. They don't really believe that Klingons exist, but they'll write like Klingons do exist. So Trump didn't say. Trump was talking. He said, "Fight like hell for yourselves, for what you believe in." Just in the same way that AOC says, "This is not supposed to be peaceful. It's supposed to make people uncomfortable. You fight back." That's the same way, like in that 15-minute presentation with different people saying fight. But they don't quote the part where he said, now, this is towards the end. Towards the end of his actual speech, which I watched live, he said, we're going to walk over to the Capitol Hill, which was 35 minutes walking at decent speed from the location that they were actually giving the speech at, and peacefully have our voices heard, make them hear our voices. Now, is it a lie that the lawmakers could, and we're now with the specifics, they could reject them? Anybody could do it. Would it be legal? Maybe not. Just like you'd think, oh, if I said they're peddling the lie that you could impeach somebody who's no longer in office. Technically, by the Constitution, impeachment, by definition, is removing somebody from office.
Yeah.
So if they're no longer in office, you can't. But then it's not a lie to do that. Just because there's no legal process for them to do it, doesn't mean they can't do it, because clearly they attempted to do it. Like, Vice President Mike Pence might not have had the legal right to do it, but he could have. And there's precedent in it. It happened in 1864, something like that. I mentioned, I talked about it before, where the person who was counting them literally just said, we're not going to accept these ones. And it was found out after, but it was past that time when politicians are just like, oh yeah, okay, you got one on us. But this whole thing, when that happened, the people were breaking into the barriers outside of Congress, outside of Capitol Hill, while Trump was still giving the speech. So again, the narrative shifted during the actual impeachment trial. And now I think you're going to see a lot of people reporting saying, okay, Trump didn't incite this, but he didn't do enough to stop it. Now that's going to be the next thing. That's going to be the thing that I think will carry on for the next at least year or so, or they might shove that about. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there will be a handful of diehards who will continue this, like AOC. Like again, I'm waiting for her to come out and say, "Why isn't this being addressed? I'm a victim." And I know her mindless fans will still cheer her and agree, and then everyone else is kind of like, "Okay, we've moved on." This is just becoming worse and worse the more it drags on.
I think she'll find something else. There'll
Yeah,
be something else coming up. There's often something new coming up, and
yeah,
there's a lot of interesting things coming up. Like the once the money goes out, simple things like schools reopening. Now they're transitioning into the climate change type of situation. Like what's going to be happening with that? The Build Back Better thing. There's also that just 100-day mark, because that's, again, we're going back to politics as usual, and they normally is a 100-day honeymoon of sorts, and then people start getting the wheels back in motion.
yeah.
You're going to start having a whole bunch of actual hearings of who's going to be actually admitted into the cabinet and things like that, because that's been actually held back now that you had this impeachment trial. Now that's done, the machinery of the government is going to start grinding again, and we're going to start seeing a lot of other distractions to have. And now a big question mark now is also that the impeachment trial is gone. What's Trump going to do? So there's a lot of interesting things to do on the political landscape coming up.
And this is
Yeah.
why they keep trying to keep the Trump stuff going, because Trump has been keeping them alive. They called it the Trump bump. The media was dying. Trump boosted their ratings. And then right after, I don't know if it was the last month or so, their CNN's ratings dropped like 44% or something. So it's like they're really suffering because people tune in to hear them talk about Trump. Majority of people don't want to tune in to hear, hey, what are the first pets doing today? What color socks does President Biden like? It's like, no, they knew Trump was driving ratings, and with him gone, it's like, what are they going to talk about now? And it's like, yeah, again, there may be like a few retirees who have nothing to do during the day, so they tune that on or something. But it's like majority of people are not going to waste their time, so they're trying to find things to stir up to keep this going. But it's looking increasingly desperate, and it's becoming harder and harder, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. All right, next one. It was his final attack on democracy, and once again it failed. By standing down, the democracy campaigners outfoxed their foes. We won by the skin of our teeth, honestly, and that's an important point for folks to sit with, says the Democracy Defense Coalition's Peoples. There's an impulse for some to say voters decided democracy and won, but it's a mistake to think that this election cycle was a show of strength for democracy. It shows how vulnerable democracy is, end quote. All right.
I think either way, whether they think it for their purpose, but I think the political systems are vulnerable. Political systems are, it's only as good as the people who are running that system. That's all it is. You have to realize that the United States of America is not just a landmass. It's not just, there's nothing especially genetic about the people who are born there, that you just become American and you get the citizenship papers. That's part of why there's the whole drive of what are people supposed to assimilate into? It's the expectations, it's the morals, it's the ethics, it's the standards. Those are the things that differ in different places and different times. That's part of why we're looking back in history and saying, oh, should we still name this after this person? Should we still behave in this kind of way? And those are questions that I think are positive to ask. And that's part of why I like the United States of America, because these are questions that people talk about, whereas in other places it's taboo to talk about these. They normally enshrine these people as such people who are out of touch or demons or gods and things like that. And that's what politics used to be. Politics used to be that religious. So when I see the current people move into that kind of status type of thing, deifying her sainthood, AOC, or holding Bernie Sanders as some kind of like totem, and Nancy Pelosi's beyond this, and way to the point where it's like, of course she should be lavishing herself in the nirvana of that $12,000 $12,000 fridge with that $12 ice cream and things. Of course, that's what she deserves, because they're the elites. They're the ones who are above us. Once you start getting to that kind of pantheonic worship of them, that's when you start putting these false expectations and thinking these are gods. These are people who can do things above us. We don't need to participate because God's got it. Put it in God's hands and things will be okay. No, we need to participate. We need to be aware that these are the things that happen. These were human beings who did what happened, whatever happened, whether you think it's legal or not, whether you think it's just or not, whether you think it was stolen or not, or fortified, it was human beings who did this. And next election in 2020 for the United States of America, for anybody else listening to this, you could build something similar to the United States of America in the positive sense, or if you think this was a negative, there's other things in your country that are going on in machinations behind the scene as well that are also human beings. Look at what's happening. You could have Myanmar, or you could have what happened in Hong Kong when the people rose up, and I think in a more of a grassroots nature than this kind of artificial managed way that you see what's happening in the United States of America. You could have other places that's just quiet, never actually hear anything, like North Korea. What's going on in North Korea and things like that. So those are the kind of things that it's people doing things. It's humans with actions. That's a foreshadowing for the next series. But yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the only thing I have to say, it's the usual redefinition of democracy. I was trying to think of an analogy for this. It's almost like the little kid who plays a game and loses, and then says, well, the game is unfair every time. But then if they win, it's a great game. It kind of reminds me of that. It's like that's how games work. You don't win. You're not guaranteed to win every single time. Sometimes you lose them. But if you have this sense of entitlement where it's I'm supposed to always win, my side is supposed to always win, and then you don't, maybe this is how you see it. It's, well, the system is broken, not, hey, the system is not going to guarantee the person I like every time.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Next paragraph. The members of the Alliance to Protect the Election have gone their separate ways. The Democracy Defense Coalition has been disbanded, though the fight back table lives on. Protect Democracy and Good Government advocates have turned their attention to pressing reforms in Congress. Left-wing activists are pressuring the newly empowered Democrats to remember the voters who put them there, while civil rights groups are on guard against further attacks on voting. Business leaders denounce the January 6th attack, and some say they will no longer donate to lawmakers who refuse to certify Biden's victory. Podhorzer and his allies are still holding their Zoom strategy sessions, gauging voters' views, and developing new messages. And Trump is in Florida facing his second impeachment, deprived of the Twitter and Facebook accounts he used to push the nation to its breaking point.
All right, that last sentence really bothers me. Again, it's either the Alinsky thing, it's lack of self-awareness, projection, or whatever. Please don't tell me the media hasn't been sensationalizing about Trump for the last several years. It's like it's one of those things I get annoyed. People say Trump divided the country. How has the media treated him versus everyone else? It's like what did Matt Taibbi, the journalist from Rolling Stone, said? Trump is the most, like, he's a left-leaning guy, but he said something like Trump is the most lying, but also lied about president. And I would say, he has lied. I mean, all politicians do, but it's about little things. Whereas even Taibbi, who's left-leaning, who worked at Rolling Stone, which hated Trump, he noticed like every little thing he does or did, they found some way to say this was a lie. Whereas like, the Democrats, oh, well, that's out of context. Well, they actually meant this. It's like, I guess in a way I'm kind of grateful for this because it exposes their tactics and shows who they really are. But it's like, you can't ever expect to win my trust again unless that you overhaul radically and change your ways, and probably, like I say, get new staff or something.
Yeah. And here they talk about deprived of the accounts, and you see the things that are happening with India, with Greta Thunberg posting out the way they're supposed to do the playbook to add tweets and such hashtags to foment the actual protests and uprisings that were going there. You look at how treatment of any support for what was happening in Hong Kong was treated by people. You shouldn't really involve in that. That's not your backyard. You don't know about those things. It's not really okay to talk about that because you're raising that kind of power. You look at what happened in Uganda when they were like, okay, yeah, we're going to Yoweri Museveni, who's one of the longest sitting strongmen here in Africa. He just decided to shut down the Twitter specifically. It might have been most of the internet. And he was like, yeah, you guys are messing up with our country here, fomenting this and arresting the opposition people. And then, I can't believe they're doing this. This is horrible. Like, Twitter is against this suppression of people's voices. So they're talking about those things. Then you go in and you see people's Twitter accounts. AOC coming out and saying, don't let people Photoshop and tweet at me. Like, find the people who are listening to these. They're literally just getting a quote that you said protests are not supposed to be uncomfortable. Who said you're supposed to make these people uncomfortable? And they're retweeting that at you. And then now you have an issue with that. So this whole deprived of the Twitter and Facebook accounts that you use to push the nation to its breaking point.
Yeah.
If they're admitting Twitter and Facebook has this ability to it, that's what I'm wondering. How much are they going to do this in other things? And this could be a thing where maybe the Arab Spring happened and they didn't really get the power of Twitter, even though that was mentioned about being a driving force of that.
Yeah.
Maybe Zuckerberg needed to have these people, Dorsey needed to have these people come down and sit with him. These people, yes, they've happened to manage and have a lot of money, but they're also human beings. They also have 24 hours in a day. They have certain focuses. They might not understand about the politics. Maybe Zuckerberg is truly trying to do this from an honest and positive aspect where he's like, maybe we need to figure out how to get less politics off of actual Facebook because it seems to have become more about that. And that's the whole thing, as we mentioned before. If something isn't explicitly conservative or to the right, it eventually becomes more leftist because those are the people who are more active and activist in that nature. It's part of how they engage with politics. So these things could become a lot more politicized than what they thought they were before. And then, of course, when it comes to the human resources, they hire their own, and then it gets more into there. And as I mentioned, these people are messaging, they're telling the story. They went out and met with these people and told them these stories, and nobody wants to be like, oh, these people are actually hunting black people. Zuckerberg, who's to assume that Zuckerberg has actually gone in and seen the studies done by black police people or black officials to see, or black Harvard professors to actually see that, no, it actually turns out that black police, if a black person is being hurt, its chances are it's a black police or like a white female policeman. But when you look at the actual numbers of engagements, there's actually no higher actually level of like attacking police. He doesn't have this information because who's covering this? CNN's not blasting that out there. It's not being talked about on a regular basis. So again, we're getting to the end of this, and I'm glad this has been out there, as you said. I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt, trying to confirm and see where people are coming from on these kind of things and see what's happening. But it's still people. Nothing is written in stone. There are no gods and demons and things like this involved in this. There's still people trying to do the best possible. And we're still living in current timeline is still the best time to be alive that I know of. And the future there's more chances the future is going to be better than it's going to be worse than it is today.
Yeah, I don't know if you've probably seen it. I had recommended to everyone Tim Pool's exchange with Jack Dorsey and the Twitter executive when he was on Joe Rogan, and he was grilling them about who got banned, and of course the lady basically danced around it and said, well, if they broke the rules, well, I'd have to see. This might have broke the rules. It's obvious Twitter is left leaning. If you tell me it isn't, you're either a liar or an idiot. I'm sorry. Like at this point, it's like, and she, of course, she tried to dance around it. And I think at one point, Timmy even said something like, you guys are so biased, you don't even realize you are biased because you live in that echo chamber where it's you hire left-leaning people, you hire more left-leaning people, you censor originally people like Milo or Alex Jones, then you start censoring moderate people, and then eventually it becomes, oh, I don't get what people are talking about. What censorship? It's because everyone you don't like is already kicked off. So you forget that there are people out there who disagree, but you just don't even allow them to speak in the first place. And then it becomes self-reinforcing, and then it's okay. They put Anita Sarkeesian on the Truth and Safety Council or whatever it was called, things like that. It's like, you've entrenched yourself in such an echo chamber, you don't even realize it's an echo chamber after a while.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's some people also don't realize. It's also we get to situations where we rely on certain platforms because they were open enough at some time, and enough people hadn't added that ideological basis to it that we thought, let's just rely on this. Yeah, we'll just keep watching the Hollywood films because they might bring an issue with this person who does this. Oh yeah, they might be okay with this person who does this other thing we consider abhorrent, but in general, it's not that big of an issue. So we'll just keep supporting this. Then it gets further and further when you're like, okay, now we're not going to do this anymore and we're going to stop watching. And then a pandemic happens where things get shut down, then you find other things. And then now that you're restarting all these new things, you start thinking, do I really need to go back to this place if I already stopped using them because of these other people and they've done these extra things? But you still want the service, you still want the product. And then now other people say, okay, now we can actually invest in this. People just think, oh, the Republicans and the Democrats, those are the only two choices that we need to have. But then now, the Libertarian Party can make some actual moves and gains in this next election. Instead of going for the presidency, they can now be like, okay, let's go to like local levels and give people other opportunities. But people are just so used to just being like, it's just this way. This is just the X. All it is X when there's all these other letters and these other things that are outside from even those 26 letters that we think are the only ways to define what actual reality is. We don't realize that reality is beyond that. This is just the way we're filtering reality, and I think that's a relearning process that we're going through right now. It's an exciting time, at least for me.
Well, one other point I was going to make before I finish this off here was I was thinking of what Terence Keeley talks about with scientific studies, and I talked a bit about the corruption in science and stuff, and one of the things he emphasized is a lot of the studies you hear about, those are the only ones they want you to hear about. They often omit studies that go against the narrative. So, for example, this summer there was a study, I think it was from Heather McDonald, who was talking about how rioting breeds conservatism, but they were working hard to suppress that study because the thing is, as BLM and Antifa are destroying cities, more and more people are like, no, we need the police, we need law and order. And it's like that empirically happens. But if a lot of people were questioning a lot of their beliefs, I think, when that was happening. But if the studies come out saying, no, this is normal, because when things get chaotic, people look for that person to come in and restore order. But they would suppress that because they want people to think, okay, this is normal. What cities are going to be torn up now? This is the way things are. So they made an effort to suppress that information. But fortunately, thanks to the internet, and, the platforms are not, there's censorship, but it's not so bad. At least we can share this among ourselves and talk about it. And people are like, no, there are valid claims here. It's just they're trying to suppress them because it's not what they want you to hear. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'll finish off here. As I was reposting this article in November and December, I heard different claims about who should get the credit for thwarting Trump's plot. Liberals argued the role of bottom-up people power shouldn't be overlooked, particularly the contributions of people of color and local grassroots activists. Others stressed the heroism of GOP officials like Van Langevelde and Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who stood up to Trump at considerable cost. The truth is that neither likely could have succeeded without the other. It's astounding how close we came, how fragile this really is, says Timmer, the former Michigan GOP executive director. It's like when Wile E. Coyote runs off the cliff. You don't look down, you don't fall. Our democracy only survives if we all believe and don't look down. Democracy won in the end. The will of the people prevailed, but it's crazy in retrospect that this is what it took to put on an election in the United States of America. With reporting by Leslie Dickstein, Maria Epsada, and Simone Shaw. The end.
I mean, for these people, it is this. I was kind of thinking, like, some politicians seem to treat people like your children. Look at the Gorilla Goon and like, oh, she should have known that thing. Yeah. Or as I mentioned, the hearts. It's like, who's actually buying this? Who's buying the stuff about the dogs and things like that? But then you look at the actual interactions on Twitter and when these things are posted, and people are interacting with it. People seem to be buying it. So putting it to this kind of cartoon type of thing is kind of accurate. And then saying, but it's crazy in retrospect. Again, they're just using that loosely, but retrospect to what? Like, if you're aware of what the United States, nothing in here really surprises me. Like, I'm like, oh, wow, like, this is how they did it, because these are the things that I was seeing. But nothing in here has really been shocking to me or surprising. It's astounding how close we came. No, this is what elections are on a regular basis. Elections are decided by these small figures. It's not that popular vote of 5 million people. It's not completely down to like one person voting, but this is life. Yeah. Life is a whole bunch of people interacting, individuals interacting in different ways, and it comes to different people, and then you work together, and we're all connected in this society, in this social construct that we exist in this civilization. So to me, that's not surprising to me. I'm wondering how literal they are by being surprised in this sense, or is it the Hollywood ending type of wrapping a story together to sell that kind of idea? I don't know.
Well, and I keep, I've said this many times, but I always talk about, like, if you say the Democrats, you say the left are for the little guys, where do you see that? I mean, look at all the money that's being poured into this. Look at all the influence to sway the election. They'll try to, put out this thing about people of color or grassroots activists. Well, again, people of color, are they wealthy people of color that are raking in millions or billions of dollars like BLM? Or are you talking about some group of poor people in the inner city that decided to get together and work on behalf of a certain cause? When you say grassroots, do you mean, okay, a small group from a small town got together and worked with other groups? Or is it, okay, some rich person funded this group and then they say, okay, we're grassroots? It's like they're really playing around with language here, but it's not the whole we're for the people, we represent the little guy. Nothing I've seen empirically bears this out on the left in recent times. And that's the irony, is that the left, at least historically, and especially from the 60s or so on, we're supposed to be about fighting for the little guy, fighting against the establishment. But they are the establishment, and they're still pushing that narrative when nothing they do actually bears it out.
Yeah. You look at certain projects and certain things that are going to happen in it, and kind of this is the worst thing is, let's look at it as just like a side kind of thing, like with reporting by Leslie Dickstein, Maria Espada, and Simone Shaw, and then it was Molly Ball who wrote the actual thing. They have a kind of situation where I'm thinking, because I was just thinking about flipping things around in this article and the complaints that certain people would have about certain things. Like if this was Trump and this was being written about a Trump win, and this was by Republicans, and it was written by Mike Ball, and okay, Leslie could be like Leslie Nielsen. It could be a guy. So it could still be Leslie Dickstein and like Mark Espada and then Simon Shaw. Would people be like, just a bunch of men writing this stuff, being pro-Trump, anti-women, and stuff like this? But here it's like, it's just women. Women are okay. Again, Leslie Dickstein could be female, and again, also they could all identify as something else. I don't know, but I think that's the end of this article, this great piece of reporting, this great piece of information, this saga, and it's not the last we've heard of this. They say they've gone apart, but there's going to be more in this. We were surprised, and you said you've seen people also on the left, political left, who are I think since I'm living in the States, I'm living in Nairobi right now, and most of my interaction with people is like on social media platforms, and it's I try to go out of it intentionally, but I don't walk by, and when you're actually on the ground, you're interacting with people more. So you said people more on the political left that have also come out and been like, "What is this article?"
I don't know. Well, I don't know about this article specifically, but I know people who have been a little more willing to talk and stuff than they were recently. I don't know. It's funny because there's a few people that I think there was one person I brought it up to, and they were kind of like, "Oh well, whatever." And I'm like, "But aren't you one of these people who rails against money and politics and whatever?" And they're like, "Oh, what are you going to do?" And it's like, okay, but this gets to the point I made at the start of the video. Do you actually care about these things, or is this you're just a tribalist, and when your side does it, it's good. When the other side does it, it's bad. You just care about the tribe and what. Then I would ask, well, why do you favor this tribe over the other? What principles? And then if you go, well, I care about the little guy and keeping money out of politics. Well, no, you don't. You clearly don't, because that's what's happening here. So then there's some other motive that you're either not letting me onto, or you're not being honest, maybe even being honest with yourself about, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so I think like now there's an admission where they've already shown that companies are deciding not to actually support certain people. So now they've even gone further in, where there's even a deeper actual thing where the companies are just doubling down and showing that the most of the money is on the Democrat side. They have control of the cathedral. They have control of the media. They have control of the entertainment. They have control of sports. Now just regular companies are like, okay, we're on that side. And now it's the divestance time. Yeah. Now it's the time when you're actually going to see some things happening. These companies, I think, we'll be continuing this conversation, but we're about to see some changes. It's not going to go as smoothly as I think some of the people thought, where it's like, oh, you just support this side and then everything goes back to peaceful. Okay, the activists that you think you're supporting are not going to be, they're not going to be cowed to what they have. The things they were actually basing their actual events and activism on are flimsy, if existent, and they want everything. They don't just want a little bit. They don't just want a seat at the table. They want the entire table. Yeah. They don't just want an article to be written by 50-50 male, female. They want it to be all female. Yeah. They want it to be just about them. It's the kind of thing that goes, and it's what I've experienced. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe now they'll feel we've actually won and we'll trust the system. But I'm not counting on that at all.
James Lindsay has some articles and videos about dealing with the wokies, and he even says, he's like, don't try and reason with these people. It's like, whatever you do, it's unless you're in complete lockstep with them on everything, they're going to demand war. That's how they are. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're going to wind down here. Yep. We went over, I think we got to like about an hour 40, so I don't know if we should instead put these into two parts.
That's probably better. Yeah, I think about an hour, 40 minutes each.
We'll then we can sign off now, and then just stay on, and we'll record just a small snippet that I'm going to put at the start of this last section thing. So I'll just be like a minute after this. But for now, thank you for listening. If you're listening to this, I guess I don't know how we'll do this. The cut thing. I think maybe there'll be a thing where like we'll record that snippet and then we'll put that snippet at the end of that first part, and then I'll show this entire last part that we talked about or something. I'll figure it out. Sure. Just for now. Goodbye. This part might actually, in fact, this is what we'll do. This part will be on the actual last section of it. So if you're watching the last section, this will be the end of the series. You can go back and listen to the other ones. And Stephen will stay on after this, and we'll record an ending section for that first part, and that first part will be prompting to come listen to the rest of it in this last part. Yeah, I think that works better. Sure. Okay, so that's it for now, guys, gals, and everything else in between. Thank you very much for coming along with us on this journey. We'll be back with more content. The next series is going to be Human Action. That's super exciting. There's a whole bunch of other content that you can find here. Hit us up with that. Anything else to say to the people?
That's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed it.
Okay. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.